"Daniel," she blurted, and the titan in the corner booth flinched like she'd backhanded him. Not Mr. Petro. Daniel, a name he'd buried deeper than bad debts. The waitress, Maya, face hot with shame, had no clue. A college kid juggling tables to pay for her mom's meds. Firing her? Easy, except something flickered in his storm gray eyes. Recognition? Fear? Doesn't matter. He's ruthless. But here's the thing. Maya's dad was Daniel, a ghost he thought he'd silenced. He has no idea how her quiet kindness, a trait inherited from her father, will force him to confront the very demons he tried to bury. Because some debts even billions can't settle. Get ready. The past is about to collect. The voice belonged to a young waitress, her hands trembling as she cleaned up a shattered water glass. But it wasn't the broken glass that stopped his heart. It was the name she called him, a name from a past he had buried under 2 decades of wealth and lies. Why did this one man who commanded empires with a word crumble at the sound of a name he hadn't heard in 20 years? The answer lies in a story of stolen dreams, a forgotten promise, and a secret that was about to change everything. The Gilded Compass was a cathedral of modern cuisine, a place where money and power convened over plates of meticulously crafted art. Its patrons were the city's titans, its atmosphere a low hum of self-importance. And at the apex of this world, in the most coveted corner booth, sat Adrian Petro. His suit was a whisper of dark bespoke wool. His silvering hair was perfectly styled, and his eyes the color of a winter storm. Missed nothing. He was dissecting a proposal from his top executive, Genevieve Dubois, his expression an unreadable mask of cool calculation. For Adrian, dinner wasn't for pleasure. It was another battlefield. His concentration was absolute until a faint clatter followed by a sharp gasp broke the spell. A young waitress, her name tag reading Maya, had fumbled a tray while refilling his water. Glass and ice skittered across the polished marble floor, a chaotic intrusion into his ordered world. Instantly, the floor manager was gliding over his face a thundercloud. "I am so terribly sorry, Mr. Petro," he began, his voice dripping with apology. Maya, her face flushed with a humiliating heat, knelt to pick up the larger shards of glass. I'm so sorry, sir. It slipped." "Please forgive me." She looked up, her wide brown eyes filled with genuine panic. She was a student at the city college, and this job paid for her mother's medication and her tuition. Getting fired was not an option. Adrienne waved a dismissive hand at the manager. "It's fine. It was an accident. Just clean it up." His voice was low and clipped the voice of a man unaccustomed to being disturbed by such trivialities. But as Maya gathered the last piece of glass, a rogue ice cube melted against her knee, and she flinched, looking up at the formidable man in the booth. A strange, fleeting sense of familiarity washed over her. It was something in the stern set of his jaw, the intensity in his gaze. It reminded her of the one faded photograph she had of her father. A wave of nervous energy made her tongue clumsy. "My apologies again, Mr. Daniel," she stammered, the name tumbling out before she could stop it. It was her father's name, a name that was a constant, bitter-sweet presence in her mind. The word hung in the air like a gunshot. The manager froze mid-bow. Genevieve Dubois, who had been silently observing, looked up from her tablet, her eyebrows knitting together in confusion. But it was Adrian Petro who had the most profound reaction. The steel mask he wore didn't just crack, it disintegrated. The blood drained from his face, leaving his skin a ghastly pale gray. The pen in his hand slipped from his fingers, clattering onto his plate with a sharp clink. His eyes, which had been assessing billion-dollar deals moments before, were now wide, fixed on Mir with an expression of raw, unadulterated shock. He wasn't just surprised. He looked like he had seen a ghost. He didn't breathe. He didn't move. The entire bustling restaurant seemed to fade into a silent, distant roar in his ears. The name Daniel, a key to a locked room in his soul, a room he had bricked up and had sworn never to visit again. And this girl, this complete stranger, had just hammered a hole straight through the wall. "What? What did you just call me?" He finally managed to ask, his voice an unrecognizable whisper. It was stripped of all its authority, all its cold command. It was the voice of a man completely undone. Maya's own blood ran cold. The gravity of her mistake crashed down on her. She had used the wrong name, a name that had clearly caused some seismic disturbance in this powerful man. "I'm so sorry, sir," she stammered, scrambling to her feet. "I don't know why I said that. My father, his name was Daniel. I must have. I'm so sorry, Mr. Petro." But her apology didn't register. Adrian was still staring his mind a whirlwind of memories he had fought for 2 decades to suppress. The smell of solder and ozone in a cramped garage, the wild, brilliant excitement in another man's eyes, the crushing weight of a terrible choice. "Get out," he rasped, not to Mir, but to the manager and his own executive. "Sir?" the manager asked, bewildered. "Now!" The word was a roar, a raw crack of thunder that made everyone within earshot jump. The manager practically scurried away, pulling a terrified mare with him. Genevieve, her composure shaken, hesitated for a moment, her gaze darting between her boss's ashen face in the retreating form of the waitress. Then, with a quiet nod, she gathered her things and left the booth. Adrian Petro was alone. He slumped back against the plush leather, his hands trembling violently. He stared at the spot where the girl had stood, his multi-billion-dollar empire, his carefully constructed life, his very identity all feeling as fragile and transparent as the glass she had just shattered on the floor. The ghost had a name, and now it seemed it had a daughter. The drive back to his penthouse was a blur of city lights smeared across the rain-streaked windows of his Rolls-Royce. Adriel didn't see any of it. He sat in the cavernous back seat, a glass of amber whiskey in his hand, the tremor still not entirely gone. The spirit did nothing to warm the ice that had formed in his chest. "Daniel," the name echoed. It wasn't just a name. It was a life of shared dreams in a dusty Silicon Valley garage, fueled by cheap coffee and the electrifying belief that they were about to change the world. Daniel Rodriguez, his partner, his best friend, the true genius behind the core algorithm that had become the foundation of Ethelgard innovations. "Genevieve." Adrian's voice was rough when his executive finally answered his call. "I need you to do something for me. Off the books. Utmost discretion." "Of course, Adrian. What is it?" Genevieve's voice was steady, the epitome of professionalism, but he could hear the undercurrent of concern. She had never seen him lose his composure like that. "The waitress at the Gilded Compass. Her name is Maya." He paused, the name feeling foreign and dangerous on his tongue. "Maya Rodriguez. I want to know everything. Where she lives, where she studies her family, her financial situation, her history, everything. I want a complete field on my desk by morning." "Rodriguez?" Genevieve repeated, a flicker of recognition in her tone. "As in, don't ask questions, Genevieve. Just do it," he snapped, then immediately regretted his harshness. "Please, it's important. It will be done," she said softly, and the line went dead. Adrian leaned his head back against the cool leather, closing his eyes. The past wasn't buried. It had only been sleeping. Meanwhile, in a cramped but clean apartment across town, Maya Rodriguez was reliving her own nightmare. Her hands shook as she recounted the story to her mother, Maria, who sat at their small kitchen table, her fingers methodically shelling peas into a bowl. Maria's face was lined with the quiet exhaustion of a woman who had worked 2 jobs for most of her life, her hands gnarled with early onset arthritis. "And then I called him Daniel Mama. I don't know what came over me. He looked like he was going to have a heart attack. I'm going to be fired. I know it." Maya paced the small linoleum floor, her anxiety a palpable thing. Maria paused her work, looking at her daughter with gentle, tired eyes. "Mija, it was a mistake, a slip of the tongue. This man, he is rich, but he is still a man." Perhaps the name reminded him of someone, but the way he looked at me, Maya shuddered. It was more than that. It was violent, like I'd struck him. She stopped pacing and sank into the chair opposite her mother. "It's just sometimes I miss Papa so much. The name is always right there, you know." Maria reached across the table and covered Maya's hand with her own. "I know, my love. I know Daniel Rodriguez was a phantom in their lives, a man of immense warmth and brilliance who had been snatched away from them 20 years ago. Maya was only 5 when he died. Her memories were fragmented like sun-drenched snapshots. The scent of his workshop that smelled of metal and rain, the rough feel of his cheek against hers, the deep rumbling laugh that could make the whole room feel safe. Her mother told her stories of his genius of the groundbreaking data compression algorithm he was developing. He and his partner were on the verge of a breakthrough. She'd said, a breakthrough that would have changed their lives forever. Then came the accident, a single car crash on a winding coastal road during a storm. The police report was simple: lost control. No foul play suspected. His partner, a young, ambitious man whose name Maria could never quite recall. Adam, or something like that, she'd say, had delivered the news. He'd been devastated, she remembered. He paid for the funeral and then disappeared from their lives, along with all of Daniel's research notes and prototypes which he'd claimed were necessary to preserve his legacy. They never saw a penny. The legacy never materialized. They were left with nothing but grief and a mountain of questions. I wish I knew more about him. Mama, Maya whispered, tracing the wood grain of the table, about his work, about his partner. Maria sighed, a sound heavy with old sorrow. It was a lifetime ago, Maya. Your father was a dreamer. Perhaps his partner realized the dream was impossible without him. We had to move on. We had to survive. Survival had been their reality ever since. And now Maya feared even that was in jeopardy because of a single inexplicable slip of the tongue. She had no idea that on the other side of the city, the man she had terrified was staring at an old digitized photograph on his 30-inch monitor. A picture of two young men, grinning arms slung around each other, standing in front of a garage with a hand-painted sign that read, DA Innovations. Daniel and Adrian. The file Genevieve had compiled was thorough, and it was a dagger in Adrian's heart. Maya Rodriguez, age 25, star art history student at City College, top of her class, working 30 hours a week at the restaurant to support her mother, Maria Rodriguez, who suffered from a chronic respiratory condition. Their apartment was heavily mortgaged. A recent hospital bill for Maria was 3 months overdue. It was a life of struggle, a world away from his own. It was the life Daniel's family was forced to live, while he, Adrian, lived in a palace built on Daniel's dream. The guilt was a physical thing, a crushing weight on his chest that made it hard to breathe. He had told himself so many lies over the years that Daniel would have wanted him to succeed, that the investors had forced his hand, that he had done what he had to do to ensure the technology saw the light of day. But looking at the pale, worried face of Daniel's daughter in a candid photo, all those lies turned to ash in his mouth. He had not just stolen an algorithm, he had stolen a future, their future. The day after the incident, Maya went to work with a knot of dread in her stomach, fully expecting to be handed a pink slip. She spent the entire morning avoiding the floor manager, her heart leaping into her throat every time he looked in her direction. But the summons never came. The day passed, then another. It was as if the horrifying encounter with Adrian Petrov had never happened. It was unnerving. A week later, a letter arrived at their apartment. It was from the hospital. Maya opened it with trembling fingers, expecting another harsh collections notice. Instead, she stared at the single sheet of paper in disbelief. Her mother's outstanding bill, a sum of nearly $10,000 that had haunted their sleep for months, had been paid in full. An anonymous donation, the letter stated, was made to the hospital's Compassionate Care Fund and specifically allocated to cover this account. "Mama, look," Maya cried, tears welling in her eyes as she showed the letter to her mother. Maria read it, then read it again, her hand flying to her mouth. Diosma, a miracle. An angel must have been watching over us. Maya felt a surge of overwhelming relief, but a tiny seed of suspicion was planted in her mind. An anonymous donation. Just days after her bizarre encounter with one of the richest men in the world. It felt too convenient, too much like a coincidence. But the idea was so outlandish, she quickly dismissed it. Who was she to question a miracle? 2 weeks after that, another letter arrived, this one from the dean's office at her college. It informed her that she had been selected as the sole recipient of the newly established Phoenix Legacy Scholarship for the Arts. It was a full-ride scholarship covering her tuition books and living expenses for the remainder of her degree. It was, the letter explained, funded by a private philanthropist who wished to remain anonymous but was dedicated to supporting promising students who had overcome adversity. This time, the feeling of disbelief was mixed with a profound sense of unease. First, the hospital bill. Now, this lightning didn't strike twice. This wasn't a miracle. It was an intervention. And she could only think of one person with the means and perhaps a motive to intervene so powerfully in her life. But why was it pity guilt? A way to buy her silence about a moment of public weakness. The name Phoenix Legacy Scholarship also pricked at her. It sounded corporate contrived. It wasn't the name of some long, dead-ad historical benefactor. It felt modern, deliberate. Adrian Petro, meanwhile, was watching from a distance, his guilt manifesting as a desperate, clumsy attempt at restitution. Each act of anonymous charity was a penance, a futile gesture to appease the ghost of his past. Genevieve arranged the payments through layers of shell corporations and foundations, ensuring no trail led back to him. "The scholarship has been accepted," Genevieve reported to him one afternoon in his sterile, glass-walled office overlooking the city. "The mother's medical bills are cleared. I've also arranged for a top specialist to coincidentally have an opening and for their insurance to suddenly cover the full consultation." Adrian stared out the window, his reflection a faint ghost-like image against the skyline he had conquered. "Is she? Is the girl okay?" "Her academic advisor says she's relieved but also confused," Genevieve answered carefully. "She's a smart young woman, Adrian. She knows this isn't random luck." "It's the best I can do," he said, his voice tight. "I can't approach her. I can't explain. What would I even say? Hello, I'm the man who built an empire on your father's stolen work while your family struggled to survive." The words were bitter, laced with 2 decades of self-loathing. Genevieve had been with him for 15 of those years. She had always known there was a shadow in his past, a closed door in his history before he became Adrian Petro. She knew he'd changed his name, that he'd come from nothing, but she had never known the specifics. Now, seeing the raw guilt etched on his face, she began to understand the true weight of the secret he carried. "Perhaps money isn't what she needs," Genevieve suggested softly. "Perhaps what she needs is the truth." Adrian turned from the window, his eyes flashing with a familiar cold fire. It was a defense mechanism. The truth. The truth would destroy everything. The company, the shareholders, my entire life. And what would it give her? A story for the tabloids and a check from a lawsuit. I am giving her a future that is more valuable than some painful, pointless truth. But even as he said it, he knew he was lying. He was protecting himself, not her. The anonymous gifts were not for Maya's benefit. They were for his. They were an anesthetic for his conscience, a way to keep the ghost at bay. But the ghost was no longer just a memory. It had a face now. It had Mir's eyes. And he was beginning to realize that all the money in the world couldn't buy his way out of this reckoning. He was drawn to her not just by guilt, but by a desperate, inexplicable need to see the daughter of the man he had wronged, to see if any of Daniel's light shone through in her. It was a dangerous, self-destructive impulse, and he knew he wouldn't be able to resist it for long. The urge became an obsession. Adrian found himself unable to focus the meticulously ordered world of Athelgard innovations, feeling hollow and meaningless. His mind kept drifting back to Maya, to the cascade of coincidences he had engineered in her life. He needed to see her again, not as a powerful billionaire in a restaurant, but as something else. He wasn't sure what. He knew returning to the Gilded Compass was too risky. Instead, he had Genevieve find out her schedule, her habits. He learned she spent her afternoons studying in the vast sunlit atrium of the City Art Museum, a place she could lose herself in beauty and history away from the cramped confines of her apartment. It was there he chose to make his move. He dressed down for him in a simple cashmere sweater and tailored trousers, leaving his usual entourage behind. He walked into the museum, an institution to which he was a major donor, and for the first time felt like an intruder. He found her easily sitting on a bench in the sculpture garden, a heavy textbook open on her lap, a notebook beside her filled with elegant, precise handwriting. The sun caught the highlights in her dark hair, and her expression was one of intense concentration. For a moment, he just watched a knot of something unidentifiable, longing, regret, fear tightening in his stomach. She looked so much like Daniel when he was deep in thought, that same focused intensity that seemed to block out the rest of the world. Taking a breath, he walked over his footsteps, echoing softly on the stone. He stopped a few feet from her bench. "Excuse me," he said, his voice quiet, measured. Maya looked up, startled. Her eyes widened in immediate recognition. It was him, the man from the restaurant. Her heart began to hammer against her ribs. All her suspicions about the anonymous charity came rushing back with dizzying force. "Mr. Petrov," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She instinctively started to gather her books, a flight response kicking in. "Please don't go," he said quickly, holding up a hand. I wanted to apologize." Maya paused, her guard still up. "Apologize for what?" "For my behavior at the restaurant. It was inexcusable. You startled me, that's all. It was no reason to be so rude. I hope I didn't cause you any trouble with your employer." His delivery was smooth rehearsed. Maya relaxed slightly, though the knot of suspicion remained. "No, sir, it's forgotten." "Good," he said, though his gaze was still intense, searching her face for something. "I was also told my foundation that a promising art history student at City College had recently received our Phoenix Legacy Scholarship." He feigned a mild, pleasant surprise. "I believe that was you, Maya Rodriguez." Maya's spine stiffened. So it was him. This was no coincidence. This was a calculated encounter. "Yes," she said, her voice cool. "It was in the hospital bill." Adrian had the grace to look momentarily taken aback by her directness. He hadn't expected her to connect the dots so brazenly. He recovered quickly. "My foundation makes many anonymous donations. We hear of people in need and we help. It's what we do." "Why me, Mr. Petro?" Maya asked, her eyes narrowing. She wasn't some damsel in distress to be rescued by a mysterious benefactor. She was a woman who understood that in this world nothing came for free. "What is it that you want?" He was struck by her fire, her refusal to be intimidated. Daniel had had that same fire. Adrian found himself abandoning his carefully prepared script. "I don't want anything," he said, and for the first time, his voice held a note of raw honesty. "When you said that name in the restaurant, it belonged to someone I knew a long time ago. A partner, a friend." He let that hang in the air. His name was Daniel. Maya's breath hitched. Her mind was racing. Her father's name was Daniel. Her father had a partner. Her father was an inventor. And this man, this tech billionaire, was admitting a connection. It couldn't be. "What? What was his last name?" she asked, her voice trembling. Adrian hesitated. This was the precipice, telling her the full truth was impossible, but he couldn't back away now. "It was a long time ago. The details are complicated. We had a falling out. I never knew what happened to him. It was a lie, a terrible, twisting lie, but it was the only one he could offer." "I see," Maya said, though her expression said she saw much more than he was telling her. She saw the evasion in his eyes, the flicker of pain he couldn't quite conceal. He decided to change tactics to move her onto ground he controlled. "Your scholarship file was impressive, Miss Rodriguez. Your professors speak very highly of you. You have a keen mind." He leaned forward slightly. "I oversee a philanthropic foundation. We're looking to expand our arts and culture division. We need people with passion and a good eye. People like you. I could offer you an internship, paid of course, something that would use your mind, not just your ability to carry a tray." The offer was staggering. An internship at the Petro Foundation would be a life-changing opportunity. It was a golden key that could unlock any door she wanted. It was also, she knew instinctively, a trap. He was trying to buy her to bring her into his orbit where he could manage her control the situation. If he was truly connected to her father, this wasn't charity. It was a strategy. "Why are you doing this?" she asked again, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. Adrian looked away toward a bronze statue of Icarus falling from the sky. "Let's just say," he said, his voice low and heavy with unspoken meaning, "that I have a debt to the past, and I believe in paying my debts." He handed her a card. It was his private number. "Think about it. The offer stands." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Maya Rodriguez sitting on the bench, the world tilting on its axis. The ghost of her father no longer felt like a distant, faded photograph. He was suddenly terrifyingly real, and his shadow was intertwined with that of the most powerful man she had ever met. The question was no longer if they were connected, but how, and what terrible secret was Adrian Petro so desperate to keep hidden. The name Adrian Petro had not always been Adrian Petro. 22 years ago in the naint world of Silicon Valley startups, he had been Adrian Price, a whip-smart, ruthlessly ambitious MBA graduate with a talent for selling a vision. But the vision itself had belonged to his partner, Daniel Rodriguez. The discrepancy between the salesman and the creator had been a quiet source of tension in their small company, but their friendship had papered over the cracks. No one knew that history better than Frank Miller. Frank was a relic from a different era of journalism. His office was a cluttered mess of old newspapers, cold coffee cups, and the faint smell of cynicism. He was a Pulitzer Prize finalist from the late 90s who now ran a small independent investigative blog that specialized in taking down giants. He didn't have the resources of the big papers anymore, but he had a nose for lies and a memory like a steel trap. Years ago, Frank had been a young tech reporter covering the dot boom. He had interviewed the duo behind DA Innovations for a piece on promising startups. He remembered Daniel Rodriguez vividly, a brilliant, passionate engineer with eyes that lit up when he talked about his compression algorithm. And he remembered Adrian Price, the polished, articulate frontman. The article was never published. The startup folded abruptly after Daniel's tragic death. Frank had always felt a pang of regret about that. The technology had been revolutionary. For 2 decades, the story was a dead end. Then a few years ago, Frank was researching the meteoric rise of Ethelgard Innovations and its reclusive founder, Adrian Prov. He found the company's original incorporation papers, and a familiar name jumped out at him. The core technology patent, the very algorithm that was the bedrock of Petro's multi-billion-dollar empire, had originally been filed by a small defunct LLC. DA Innovations. The connection was tenuous. Petro had likely just bought the dormant patent for a pittance. It happened all the time. Still, Frank filed it away. His interest was reignited when an anonymous email landed in his inbox. It was from a disgruntled former board member of Ethelgard, forced out in a power play by Petro. The email was short and cryptic. "You were right to be curious about the origins of Athlard. Petro isn't who he says he is. Look into his past. Look for a ghost named Daniel Rodriguez." That was all Frank needed. He began digging in earnest. He pulled old DMV records, university transcripts, anything he could find. He discovered that Adrian Petro didn't exist prior to 20 years ago. But Adrian Price, who matched his age and physical description, had disappeared at the exact same time right after liquidating DA Innovations' assets, including the patent for a negligible sum. He had legally changed his name, moved to the other side of the country, and re-emerged a year later as Adrian Petro, founder of a new company with a revolutionary piece of tech. The final piece of the puzzle was connecting it to the present. He ran a deep search on the name Rodriguez, cross-referenced with Petrov. He expected nothing, but then a hit, a gossip column tidbit about a strange incident at the Gilded Compass. Billionaire Adrian Petro causing a scene shouting at his staff. Frank made some calls to his sources on the restaurant scene. He got the waitress's name, Maya Rodriguez, Daniel Rodriguez's daughter. Frank felt the familiar, exhilarating thrill of the hunt. This wasn't just a story about a shrewd business deal anymore. This was a story about betrayal, identity theft, and a 20-year-old lie. He found Maya outside her college campus, a coffee and a textbook in her hands. He approached her cautiously, his demeanor that of a kindly rumpled professor rather than a predator. "Miss Maya Rodriguez," he began. She looked up wary. After her encounter with Petro, she was suspicious of all strangers. "Yes, can I help you? My name is Frank Miller. I'm an investigative journalist." He handed her a business card. "I'm working on a story about the early days of the tech industry, specifically about a brilliant inventor named Daniel Rodriguez. I believe he was your father." Maya froze the coffee cup, trembling in her hand. "My father? Why?" "I believe his work, his legacy may have been misrepresented," Frank said, choosing his words carefully. "I knew him briefly. I interviewed him once. He was working with a partner, a young man named Adrian Price." Mir's eyes widened. "Price, not Petrov, a different name." I don't know that name." "I'm not surprised." Frank said, his expression grim, because Adrian Price doesn't exist anymore. He changed his name 20 years ago to Adrian Petro. The textbook slipped from Mir's grasp and hit the pavement with a heavy thud. The world tilted again, but this time the pieces weren't just shifting. They were clicking into place with horrifying clarity. The scholarship, the paid medical bills, the job offer, the look of sheer terror on Petro's face in the restaurant. It wasn't just because she had said a name from his past. She had said her father's name, the name of the man he had erased. "What are you saying?" she whispered, though she already knew the answer. "I'm saying," Frank said, his voice low and serious, "that Adrian Petro's entire empire is built on your father's invention, and I think he has been lying about it and about his own identity for a very long time. The question is, what else is he lying about?" Frank's last question hung in the air, sinister and heavy. Maya thought of the official story of her father's death. A simple car accident, no foul play, a story delivered to her grieving mother by the man who now called himself Adrian Petro. A cold, terrible dread, darker than any she had ever known, began to seep into her bones. The secret was no longer just about a stolen invention. It was now about a stolen life. The conversation with Frank Miller lit a fire in Mir. The grief she had carried her whole life, a soft, melancholic ache, was now forged into a sharp, cold anger. She wasn't just the daughter of a ghost anymore. She was his avenger. She declined Adrian's internship offer via a curt professional email, an act of defiance that felt both terrifying and empowering. She knew she couldn't rely solely on Frank Miller. This was her fight. She had to find her own proof, something undeniable that connected the man she knew as Petro to the father she barely remembered. Her mother, Maria, had kept a single box of Daniel's belongings in a dusty corner of a storage closet. It was mostly filled with sentimental items, old sweaters that had lost their scent, a handful of de-geared paperbacks, a coffee mug with a chipped rim. But at the very bottom, beneath a stack of his college notebooks filled with complex equations Maya couldn't decipher, was a thin, leather-bound journal. She had never looked through it before. Her mother had said it was too painful. Now she opened it with trembling hands. Most of it was technical diagrams and formulas that meant nothing to her. But scattered between the code were personal entries written in her father's looping, energetic script. March 12th. Adrian is a marvel. He pitched the algorithm to Blackwood Capital today. He has a way of making them see the future. I just build it. He sells it. Perfect partnership. April the Setningen. The pressure from Blackwood is immense. They want to move faster, cut corners. Adrian is handling it, but I can see the strain. He's more edgy, less talk about changing the world, more about quarterly projections. May 17th. Big fight with Adrian today. He wants to sign an amended contract with Blackwood that gives them a controlling interest and pushes me out of any governance role. He says it's the only way to get the final round of funding. It feels like he's selling my soul to them. He called me naive, said this is how the world works. Is he right? The last entry was dated 2 days before his death, June 5th. I can't shake this feeling. Something is wrong. Adrian is avoiding my calls. I found a clause in the new paperwork he wants me to sign. It effectively assigns sole ownership of the patent to him in the event of my incapacitation or departure from the company. He says it's a standard legal formality. It feels like a threat. I'm driving up the coast tomorrow to meet him at his rental to sort this out once and for all, face to face. Maya's blood ran cold. Driving up the coast tomorrow to meet him. He had been driving to meet Adrian on the very day he died. The accident was no longer a random tragedy. It was now a terrifyingly convenient event for the man who stood to gain everything from it. She needed more. She remembered her mother mentioning that Adrian Price had handled everything after the funeral. He had come to their old house and collected all of her father's research, all his prototypes. He had claimed he was preserving Daniel's legacy. He had been erasing the evidence. Driven by a cold fury, Mia took a leave of absence from her studies and her job, using the first of the Phoenix Legacy Scholarship Funds to hire a private data recovery specialist. She gave him the one piece of hardware she'd found in the box, an old brick-like external hard drive from the late 90s. Daniel had labeled it Project Sparrow Backup. While she waited, she met with Genevieve Dubois. She called Adrian's direct line, the number he had given her at the museum, and asked to speak with his executive assistant. Surprised, Genevieve agreed to meet her for coffee. likely assuming Maya was reconsidering the internship. They met in a neutral cafe, far from their respective worlds. "I appreciate you meeting me, Miss Dubois," Mia began, her voice steady. "Please call me Genevieve." "I was sorry to hear you wouldn't be joining the foundation," the older woman said with polished warmth. "I can't work for him," Maya stated flatly, "but I have to ask you something. You've been with him for a long time. Do you know who he was before he was Adrian Petro?" Genevieve's professional smile faltered. She chose her words with extreme care. "Adrian values his privacy. His past is his own. His past is my father's past." Maya counted, her voice dropping. "My father, Daniel Rodriguez, his partner, the man whose work your entire company is based on." Genevieve visibly palled. The truth of Mare's words hit her with the force of a physical blow. She had suspected she had pieced together fragments, but she had never heard it stated so plainly, so boldly. She saw the pain and determination in May's eyes, and her carefully constructed loyalty to Adrian began to fracture. She thought of his constant torment, his sleepless nights, the way he flinched at loud noises. She had always attributed it to the pressures of his position. Now she saw it for what it was, the haunting of a guilty man. "What do you want, Maya?" Genevieve asked, her voice barely a whisper. "The truth," Maya said. "He was supposed to meet my father the day he died. I want to know what happened on that road." Genevieve looked away, her composure crumbling. "I can't. I don't know everything, but I know that whatever happened that day, it broke him. The man you see now was forged in that fire. He's never been free of it." She leaned forward, her eyes pleading. "Be careful. The truth you're looking for. It might be more terrible than you can imagine." The day the data specialist called, Maya was sitting in her apartment, her father's journal open in front of her. "Miss Rodriguez," the man said over the phone, "we got it. It took some doing, but we recovered most of the data from the drive. There are work files, correspondence, and one audio file. It's corrupted at the end, but the first few minutes are clear. It sounds like a recorded phone call. The file name is Blackwood Final Offer." Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. "Send it to me. Send it all to me now." Minutes later, a secure link appeared in her inbox. She downloaded the file, her hands shaking so badly she could barely click the mouse. She put on her headphones, closed her eyes, and pressed play. First, she heard the familiar crackling sound of a dial-up modem, a sound from another lifetime. Then a voice, young, arrogant, confident. It was Adrian Price. "Listen, the deal is the deal," Adrian's voice said. "He's not signing. He's getting sentimental. Thinks the work is more than just a product." Another voice, older Sir, replied, "It must be someone from Blackwood Capital. We don't pay for sentiment, Price. We paid for a patent. Is he going to be a problem?" There was a pause, then Adrian's voice returned, lower, conspiratorial. "He's driving up to see me tomorrow. We're going to talk it out on the coast road. It's a nasty stretch of highway, especially if the weather turns. Things happen on that road. A man can get distracted. A car can swerve." The other voice was chillingly calm. "I trust you will acquire his signature one way or another, or ensure his departure from the company is permanent. Our investment must be protected." "Don't worry," Adrian said, and the sound made Mir's stomach turn. It was the sound of a man sealing a devil's bargain. "I'll handle Daniel." The audio devolved into static, the end of the recording lost to time and decay. But it didn't matter. Maya ripped the headphones from her ears, a strangled sob escaping her lips. It wasn't just theft. It wasn't just a lie. It was a conspiracy. Whether by direct action or malicious inaction, Adrian Petro was responsible for her father's death. He hadn't just stolen a legacy. He was a killer, and she was going to make him confess. The confrontation was not going to happen in a boardroom or a lawyer's office. It had to be on her terms. Maya called Adrian's private number, her voice a cold, steady instrument she didn't recognize as her own. "It's Maya Rodriguez," she said when he answered. "We need to talk. Not about an internship, about my father." A heavy silence met her from the other end of the line. Then Adrian's voice rough with resignation. "Where? The place you were supposed to meet him?" She said the words like stones in her mouth. "Vista Point on the Old Coast Highway. Sunset." She hung up before he could reply. The drive up the coast was agonizing. Every turn in the winding road was a fresh stab of grief. This was where it happened. This was where her father's life had ended. The sky was a bruised purple and orange as the sun began to sink below the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows across the asphalt. Vista Point was a deserted turnout overlooking a sheer cliff that dropped hundreds of feet to the churning gray Pacific below. A simple guardrail was the only thing separating the road from the abyss. Adrian was already there, standing by the rail, his back to the road. He wasn't wearing his usual armor of a bespoke suit. He looked older, smaller, dressed in a simple dark coat, a man stripped of his power, waiting for judgment. Maya got out of her car, the cold sea wind whipping her hair across her face. She walked toward him, stopping a few feet away. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound, the crash of waves against the rocks below and the cry of a lone seagull. "This is where you were supposed to meet him," Maya said, her voice devoid of emotion. It was a statement, not a question. Adrian didn't turn. He just stared out at the endless water. "Yes, he never made it," she continued, her voice gaining a hard edge. "He had a car accident just a few miles from here. Lost control," the police said. "Funny how that happens." Adrian flinched, a barely perceptible tremor that ran through his body. He finally turned to face her. The mask was gone. His face was a wreck of guilt and exhaustion, his eyes haunted. "Maya, I don't." She cut him off, taking a step closer. "Don't you dare say you're sorry. I found his journal, Adrian. Or should I call you Adrian Price? I read about your fight, about the contract, about how he was coming here to confront you." She saw the flicker of panic in his eyes. He hadn't known the journal existed. "And then," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, "I found this." She pulled out her phone and played the audio file. The sound of his own young, ruthless voice echoed in the sea between them. A nasty stretch of highway. Things happen on that road. "I'll handle Daniel." Adrian visibly crumbled. It was as if the sound of his own damnation had severed the last string holding him together. He staggered back against the guardrail, his face ashen, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "You killed him," Maya said, the accusation raw and brutal. "Whether you ran him off the road yourself or you just let it happen, you killed him." Tears streamed down Adrian's face, the first tears he had shed in 20 years. "No," he choked out, his voice breaking. "I swear to you, I never touched him. I wouldn't have. I couldn't have." "Then what happened?" She demanded, her own tears now starting to fall hot and angry. "Tell me the truth. For once in your miserable, stolen life, tell the truth." He sank to his knees on the cold gravel, his head in his hands, the billionaire titan reduced to a broken, weeping man. "We were going to meet here," he began, his voice choked with sobs. "I was going to try and convince him to sign. The investors, Blackwood, they were threatening to sue us into oblivion, to ruin us both if we didn't give them full control of the patent. I was scared. I was young and stupid and ambitious. I thought I could make him see that it was the only way." He looked up at her, his eyes pleading. "That phone call, I was posturing, trying to sound tough for the investor. I never thought." He took a deep, shuddering breath. "I was waiting here. He was late." Then the storm rolled in, worse than anyone predicted. The rain was coming down in sheets. I got a call. It was the highway patrol. There had been an accident down the road. A car matching Daniel's had gone through the guardrail further down the pass where it was weaker. They said he couldn't have survived the fall. He squeezed his eyes shut, the memory as vivid as if it were yesterday. And my first thought, my very first god-awful thought, was not grief. It was relief. The problem was solved. The patent was mine. The investors were happy. I was free. The confession was uglier than anything Mayer could have imagined. He hadn't been a murderer in action, but he had been one in his heart. He had wished her father gone, and the universe had complied. "I went to your mother," he continued, his voice thick with shame. "I lied. I played the part of the grieving friend. I took his research, his notes, and I ran. I changed my name, buried Adrian Price, and used Daniel's genius to build my world, telling myself every single day that I was honoring his legacy. But I wasn't. I was desecrating his memory. Every dollar I made, every building I put my name on, it's all been poison. I haven't had a single peaceful night's sleep in 20 years. He looked at Maya, his face a mask of utter self-loathing. I didn't kill your father, Maya. My greed and my ambition did. I let him die. I profited from his death. In the eyes of God, there is no difference. The wind howled around them, a mournful cry from the sea. Maya stood over him, the audio file on her phone, the journalist's evidence, the journal enough to destroy him utterly. She could send him to prison, not for murder, but for the corporate fraud, the conspiracy, the lies that had led to this moment. She could strip him of his empire and leave him with nothing. But as she looked at the broken man at her feet, she saw not a monster, but a pathetic, hollowed-out shell haunted by a ghost of his own making. Destroying him wouldn't bring her father back. It wouldn't erase the 20 years of struggle she and her mother had endured. A different kind of justice began to form in her mind. A justice her father, the brilliant, compassionate dreamer, might have wanted. "Get up," she said, her voice hard as steel. "Crying on your knees changes nothing. Your reckoning is just beginning." Adrian looked up, confused. "What? What are you going to do?" "You're not going to jail," she said, and a flicker of hope crossed his face, which she immediately extinguished. "That would be too easy. You're going to live with this, and you are going to pay, not with anonymous checks or guilty job offers. You are going to give my father back his name." The story of Adrian Petro didn't end with a dramatic courtroom battle or a scandalous headline, though Frank Miller was furious when Mia refused to give him the final damning evidence. Instead, it ended with a press conference that shook the tech world to its core. Adrian Petro, flanked by his lawyer and a silent, poised Maya Rodriguez, publicly confessed. He told the world that the foundational technology of Ethalgard Innovations was the sole creation of his late partner, Daniel Rodriguez. He announced the renaming of the company's immensely profitable R&D division to the Daniel Rodriguez Institute for Innovation. Furthermore, 50% of the company's shares were transferred into a trust controlled by Mir, not as a payout, but as rightful ownership. He didn't confess to the conspiracy, but in admitting the theft of his legacy, he admitted to the theft of his life. Adrian Petro kept his freedom, but lost his soul's prison. He was forced to live every day in the shadow of the man he betrayed his name, now forever. A footnote to Daniel Rodriguez's genius. For Maya, it wasn't about the money. It was about seeing her father's name in lights, his picture in textbooks, his genius finally acknowledged. She had reclaimed a stolen legacy not for revenge, but for remembrance. Justice, she learned, isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about rebuilding what was broken and forcing the truth into the light, no matter how long it's been buried. If this story of a life-altering secret and the difficult path to justice moved you, please hit that like button to let us know. Share it with someone who loves a story that feels real. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another tale that uncovers the hidden truths behind the lives we think we know. What would you have done in Mayor's place? Let us know in the comments below.